The night was perfectly cold and still across the Channel country. Willie Parsons sat on his horse, the leather of his saddle creaking softly as he shifted his weight. Around him stretched nothing but flat, endless darkness. The kind of darkness that exists only in the remote Australian outback, where the nearest town is hundreds of kilometres away and the stars are so bright they cast shadows. It was 1973 and Willie was driving cattle through one of the most isolated regions on Earth. He'd made this journey dozens of times before, knew every waterhole and track, every landmark in this desolate country. A man didn't survive out here without knowing the land intimately. But what he was seeing now, this was something beyond his experience, beyond his understanding. A light had appeared on the horizon, not the warm flicker of a campfire or the steady beam of headlights. This was different. It glowed with an eerie, unnatural luminescence, like a miniature moon hovering just above the ground. And as Willie watched, transfixed, the light began to move. It drifted closer, maintaining its height, maybe 2 or 3 metres off the ground. Willie's horse shifted nervously beneath him, sensing something was wrong. The light continued its approach, slow and deliberate, as if it were watching him, considering him. Then it stopped. Hanging in the darkness about 50 metres away, Willie could see it clearly now, a sphere of greenish white light, pulsing gently, casting an otherworldly glow across the scrubland. There was no sound, no engine, no wind, nothing, just silence and the impossible floating light. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand straight up, the hair on his arms, on his legs, all rising in an involuntary response to something his rational mind simply couldn't process. His horse was trembling now, ready to bolt. Willie Parsons was a tough man, hardened by decades in the outback. He'd faced droughts, floods, venomous snakes, and isolation that would break most people. But he sat there in the darkness, watching that light pulse and hover with apparent intelligence, and he felt something that he rarely experienced. Pure, primal fear. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the light began to move again. Not away, but to the side, keeping its distance. It seemed to pace him, matching his speed as he urged his horse forward. And for the next hour, that light followed him through the darkness, never getting closer, never falling behind, just there, a silent, glowing companion through the emptiness. When dawn finally broke and the light vanished with the rising sun, Willie Parsons was left with an experience he could never fully explain. He'd seen the Min light, and like countless others before and after him, he would spend the rest of his life trying to make sense of what happened that night in the Channel country. Welcome to Strewth, a podcast where we delve into the most perplexing mysteries Australia has ever witnessed. I'm your storyteller, Mark, and today we're travelling to the Channel country, a vast, remote region straddling the Queensland, South Australia and Northern Territory borders. This truly is some of the most isolated terrain on Earth, where 1.3 million square kilometres of flat, treeless plains stretch to every horizon, where towns are separated by hundreds of kilometres of red dirt and scrubland, and where, on certain nights, mysterious lights appear that have defied explanation for thousands of years. The Min lights are described by witnesses as glowing spheres that hover, follow travellers, split into multiple orbs and move with apparent intelligence. First Nations Australians observed them for millennia before European settlement, incorporating them into Dreamtime stories as ancestral spirits. European settlers first documented them in the 1890s near the now vanished Min Hotel in Queensland, giving the phenomenon its enduring name. What makes the Min lights so compelling is the sheer number and credibility of witnesses. We're talking about truck drivers, station owners, police officers, scientists, and entire families who've watched these lights for hours. So join me here in the outback as we explore one of Australia's most enduring enigmas, a phenomenon that exists at the intersection of science and the unexplained. Long before Europeans named them, long before the Millennia Hotel even existed, the lights were known to the First Nations peoples of the Channel Country. The Mitakudi and Mayawali peoples around Boulia, the Kalkadoon near Mount Isa, and the Naluma in the Pilbara region of Western Australia all had observed these mysterious lights and woven them into their understanding of the world. The Dreamtime story, collected by June Barker in Gadi Mirabuka, tells of a time before stars existing in the night sky. In this ancient time, darkness ruled the earth, and with it came fear. A young boy named Dundi, brave beyond his years, stood in the open darkness and called out 3 times, "I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I am not afraid." In response, a big round ball of fire descended from the sky, acknowledging his courage. This story, passed down through countless generations, connects the lights to creation time itself, to courage, transformation, and the eternal dance between darkness and light. First Nations interpretations are sophisticated and multifaceted. The most common understanding across multiple groups is that the lights represent spirits of ancestors. Dr. Curtis Roman, a First Nations researcher who has collected stories about the phenomenon, notes that many reported sightings occur near bodies of water or where water once existed, suggesting a connection to sacred water sites. The lights move in ways First Nations people describe as like a snake, which may link to rainbow serpent beliefs, one of the most important creation beings in First Nations spirituality. But perhaps most significantly, the lights are believed to perform a guardian's role, checking on sacred sites and scaring off people who aren't supposed to be there. Some Indigenous Australians have observed that the number of sightings increased with European settlement in the outback. Whether this indicates environmental changes, the lights fulfilling their guardian role more actively, or simply more reporting as communities interacted, remains open to interpretation. But what's clear is that First Nations knowledge includes specific protocols for encountering the lights, avoiding direct engagement, making particular sounds to ward them off, and showing proper respect. For European settlers pushing into the outback in the late 1800s, the lights were an entirely new phenomenon, frightening and inexplicable. The first documented European encounter occurred in the 1890s near Boulia in Queensland's Channel Country, though the exact date remains disputed, with sources suggesting anywhere from 1890 to 1918. The encounter involved a stockman who was riding alone at night. He saw a light approaching him across the plains, growing larger and brighter as it came closer. Terrified, he spurred his horse and fled. The light followed him, keeping pace regardless of his speed, maintaining the same distance behind him. By the time he reached the Boulia police station, he'd broken into a cold sweat, describing himself as terror-stricken. The police officer who took his statement was initially sceptical until others began reporting similar experiences. The lights were appearing regularly near a local landmark, the Min Min Hotel, a rough and ready establishment that served travellers on the remote track between Boulia and Winton. The Min Min Hotel itself burned down in February 1924 during a massive storm, leaving nothing but ruins in the desert. But the name stuck. These mysterious lights became known as the Min Min lights after the vanished hotel, where so many witnesses first encountered them, where so many witnesses had to down a few quick drinks just to recompose themselves. D.B. O'Connor's 1934 poem, Light of the Min Min, proved culturally transformative. It told of a horseman encountering a phosphorescent bird near the Min Min Hotel. This single poem is credited with popularising the phenomenon nationally, transforming it from a regional curiosity into a true Australian legend. Sightings increased dramatically after the poem's publication, whether due to increased awareness or something else entirely. By the 1960s, the Min Min lights had cemented themselves in Australian folklore. Road signs entering Boulia began reading, This unsolved modern mystery is a light that at times follows travellers for long distances. It has been approached, but never identified. The road between Boulia and Winton was named Min Min Way in honour of the phenomenon, but folklore status didn't diminish the genuine fear and confusion the lights inspired in those who encountered them. As more Australians ventured into the remote outback, the witness accounts multiplied, each adding new details to the mystery. What makes the Min Min lights so compelling is not just that people see them, but how consistently witnesses describe experiences that seem to defy conventional explanation. Over decades, a pattern has emerged from hundreds of witness accounts. A pattern that suggests something genuinely unusual, whether natural or otherwise. Genevieve Hammond runs the Desert Sand Motel in Boulia. She's a practical woman, not given to flights of fancy, and she's heard plenty of Min Min stories from travellers passing through. But hearing about them and seeing them are two very different things. It was during a camping trip on a remote cattle station that Genevieve and her husband John had their encounter. They were sitting by their campfire, enjoying the vast silence of the outback night, when John noticed something odd on the horizon. A light, not a star. This was larger, closer, and moving. As they watched, the light revealed itself as a greenish oval shape, blurry around the edges, bobbing up and down perhaps a metre or two above the ground. It moved very slowly to the left, then came back on itself, as if pacing back and forth. They watched it for about 15 minutes, trying to rationalise what they were seeing. Could it be a neighbour? They wondered aloud. A car? Maybe someone's out checking on stock. But the nearest homestead in that direction was 120 kilometres away. There were no roads where the light appeared, no reason for anyone to be out there in the middle of the night. The next day, curious and determined to solve the mystery, John drove to the location where they'd seen the light. He searched the area carefully, looking for tyre tracks, a campsite, any sign of human presence. But there was nothing. The red earth stretched away unmarked, the spinifex grass undisturbed. Whatever they'd seen had left no trace. It couldn't have been anything else, Genevieve concluded. There's no other explanation. It was a Min Min light. Shelley Norton, Boulia's tourism officer, reports that encounters continue regularly. In the year before a recent interview, 4 visitors reported seeing the lights. They come in and they don't know what they've seen, Norton explains, but you can guarantee that it's a Min Min light. One September sighting involved a family camping on the Boulia to Winton Road. The husband saw what he thought was the moon rising, then turned around and saw the actual moon on the opposite side of the sky. It was like there was 2 moons, he reported, stunned. Then one disappeared. Norton has observed patterns in the encounters. Sometimes it's a lone object that stays the same distance away. Other times, it seems to follow people, then splits into 2 or 3 and dances above the treetops. The following behaviour that is often reported is particularly unnerving. In July 2018, Paul and Jane Hotchkiss were driving near Peak Creek when a light began pacing their vehicle. No matter how fast or slow they drove, the light maintained its position beside them. For 50 kilometres, that light kept them company before finally veering off and disappearing into the darkness. Marcia Pacton's experience at the Boulia Caravan Park at 5:35am on July the 3rd, 2017, captured a different emotional response. Unlike many witnesses who feel fear, Paxton felt privileged. "I'm amazed that both John and I have seen a Min Min," she said. "I hope it's lucky and wonder why we were chosen to see it." She even managed to photograph what she saw. Though like most Min Min photographs, the image shows only an indistinct glow, nothing like the vivid, structured light her eyes perceived. Daniel Parsons had a particularly poignant encounter in 2015. He was travelling through the outback with his father when they saw a light that his father recognised immediately. "I've seen that before," his father said quietly. It was the same type of light he'd witnessed 42 years earlier in the exact same region. 2 generations, separated by 4 decades, witnessing the same inexplicable phenomenon in the same remote location. The variety of descriptions is striking. Some witnesses see single lights, others see multiple lights dancing around each other. Colours range from greenish white to orange to reddish purple. Some lights hover stationary, others bob and weave, some follow at a distance. Others approach close enough that witnesses can see details, though they can never quite reach them. But what is consistent is this sense of interaction, the feeling that these lights aren't just random phenomena, but something that responds to human presence. Witnesses describe the lights as playful, curious, and even intelligent. They retreat when approached. They follow when you flee. They seem to toy with observers, maintaining just enough distance to remain mysterious. December 18, 2022, 1:17 a.m. In Arindu, approximately 50 kilometres south of Strewth, Queensland, Michael was camping with a friend under the vast canopy of outback stars, the kind of pristine darkness that exists only in remote Australia, where artificial light pollution is hundreds of kilometres away. He was lying on his swag, chatting with his mate, when something streaked across the sky. A red light, moving at incredible speed, shot overhead and disappeared. Space debris, Michael thought. The International Space Station perhaps, or a satellite. He mentioned it to his friend and thought nothing more of it. But then the light returned. And this time, it moved slowly, deliberately. It descended from the night sky, lowering itself until it hovered directly overhead. Michael sat up, his casual dismissal evaporating into something closer to disbelief. The light hovered for approximately 2 minutes, long enough for the initial shock to fade, long enough for doubt to creep in, long enough to wonder if this was really happening. Then Michael snapped out of it and remembered his phone. He fumbled for it, hands shaking slightly as he activated the camera. By the time he was recording, the object had begun its transformation. The light transitioned through colours, purple, green, red, each shift smooth and deliberate. Then it radiated bright white light, not like a bulb switching on, but like something internal, becoming visible. The footage Michael captured would later be examined by journalist Ross Coulthart, who specialises in investigating unusual phenomena. Coulthart verified the metadata, confirmed Michael's technical expertise, and concluded that the footage was unlikely to be fabricated. He was a modern witness, with modern documentation, capturing something that defied easy explanation. These recent encounters that we've just told you about from 2015, 2017, 2018, 2022, they demonstrate that the Min phenomenon is not fading into history. It's ongoing, actively witnessed, regularly reported. In an age of smartphones and instant documentation, when everyone carries a high-res camera in their pocket, the lights continue to appear. And yet here's the paradox. Professional photographers consistently produce only indistinct glows, nothing like the vivid lights witnesses describe seeing with their naked eyes. Michael's 2022 video is the clearest modern documentation available, and even it shows something ambiguous, compelling but not definitive. Some interpret this photographic elusiveness as supporting the mirage explanation. Atmospheric refractions are notoriously difficult to photograph and appear differently to eyes versus cameras. Others suggested something more unusual about how the phenomenon interacts with different sensing modalities, something that affects human visual perception differently than photographic sensors. The proliferation of smartphones and cameras has not produced the expected flood of definitive evidence. Instead, it's deepened the mystery, adding a new layer of puzzlement to a phenomenon that was already inexplicable enough. Professor John D. Pettigrew was not a man prone to believing in the unexplainable. As an emeritus professor of physiology and director of the Vision, Touch and Hearing Research Centre at the University of Queensland, he approached the Min lights with rigorous scientific scepticism. He'd heard the stories, he'd listened to the witness accounts, and he decided to investigate properly. His hypothesis was straightforward. The Min lights were superior mirages called Fata Morgana, caused by temperature inversions. In the outback, cold, dense air settles next to the ground at night. This layer acts as what Pettigrew called a giant fibre optic light pipe, refracting light from distant sources, potentially up to 300 kilometres away, over the horizon and into the night sky. The theory was elegant. It explained the light's apparent movement as the refraction of moving vehicle headlights on distant roads. It explained colour changes, as atmospheric refraction shifts wavelengths from red to orange to yellow to green. It explained why sightings peak in midwinter when stable air conditions and cold ground layers are most pronounced. In 1992, Pettigrew conducted his definitive experiment. He drove his vehicle 10 kilometres from his campsite, placing it completely out of normal line of sight over a slope and into a watercourse. With his headlights on, 6 observers at camp watched through binoculars. Via radio, they reported seeing a bobbing light just above the horizon, approximately half the size of a full moon, with colour changes from vivid red to orange to yellow to green. When Pettigrew switched his headlights on and off, the light disappeared and returned. He had successfully reproduced the Min phenomenon on demand under controlled conditions. Later, using careful geometry, he determined that a Min light he observed was actually truck headlights approximately 300 kilometres away, an astonishing demonstration of atmospheric refraction's power. His research, published in March 2003 in the journal Clinical and Experimental Optometry, remains the definitive scientific explanation. It's rigorous, peer-reviewed, and experimentally verified. Case closed. Except it wasn't, not entirely, because Professor Pettigrew, despite his scientific triumph, had his own encounter with the phenomenon that left him unsettled. He initially saw what his team thought were fox eyes reflected in headlights, but when they turned off the headlights, the bright spot of light remained, glowing in the darkness. The experience was powerful enough that he noted the phenomenon could reduce grown men to tears, and described his own reaction as literally hair-raising. He was a scientist who had explained the mechanism, demonstrated it experimentally, published his findings, and yet acknowledged that something about the direct experience transcended his explanation. The interactive behaviour, lights that chase vehicles for 50 kilometres, split and merge, approach and retreat, maintain constant apparent distance despite pursuit, these suggested either profound psychological components or genuine unexplained aspects. Pettigrew died in 2019 following a car accident, leaving the field without its primary investigator. Since his 2003 paper, no major peer-reviewed scientific research has emerged on the Min lights. The extreme remoteness of the Channel Country makes systematic study difficult. It requires extensive travel into isolated regions with very challenging conditions. Unlike Norway's Hessdalen lights, which have been identified from 40 years of continuous automated monitoring, no permanent scientific observation infrastructure exists for the Min phenomenon. The man who solved the mystery became, in his own way, one of its most credible witnesses to its genuine strangeness. His scientific explanation stands valid and important, but his personal acknowledgement that something remains unaccounted for, that the experience exceeds the explanation, adds a layer of complexity that skeptics and believers alike must grapple with. Today, the Min lights continue to puzzle and fascinate. Boulia has embraced the phenomenon, investing nearly $500,000 in 2021 in the Min Encounter Facility, an interactive centre that explores both the Aboriginal cultural significance and the scientific explanations. The town hosts annual camel races that draw thousands to one of Australia's most remote locations, all under the banner of the mysterious lights. The modern scientific consensus, such as it exists, accepts Pettigrew's Fata Morgana explanation as the most rigorous and experimentally supported theory. But this consensus is thin. The phenomenon remains scientifically understudied compared to similar global phenomena like Norway's Starlin lights or even the Marfa lights of Texas. What persists beyond the explanation are the experiential realities that don't quite fit. The pre-automobile First Nations account, which span a millennia, cannot be explained by refracted car headlights. This requires either different mechanisms or different interpretations of what witnesses experienced. The interactive behaviour described by modern witnesses seems more sophisticated than simple atmospheric refraction would suggest. The photographic elusiveness remains genuinely puzzling. If Min lights are simply mirages of distant light sources, modern photographic technology should capture them reliably. The consistent failure of professional photography and instrumental detection, despite simultaneous visual sightings, suggests something unusual is occurring. Whether it's the way atmospheric mirages interact with human vision differently than with sensors, psychological components beyond simple optics, or something else entirely. But perhaps the most significant aspect is cultural. The Min lights represent a rare Australian phenomenon where First Nation traditional knowledge predating European contact remains actively acknowledged and respected. The lights can simultaneously be atmospheric optical phenomena, guardian spirits protecting sacred country, and defining symbols of outback mystery, without these perspectives necessarily conflicting. The phenomenon sends us a friendly reminder that even in our technological age with satellites, sophisticated instruments and global information networks, significant mysteries persist in unbelievably remote places. The Channel Country's 1.3 million square kilometres of flat, treeless plains create atmospheric conditions found nowhere else on Earth. Perhaps it's appropriate that such a unique landscape harbours a unique mystery. On one level, the Min lights represent a fascinating atmospheric phenomenon, a trick of light and temperature that creates convincing illusions. Pettigrew proved that much beyond reasonable doubt. But on another level, there's something more. They're a reminder that human experience exceeds scientific explanation, that seeing something with your own eyes in the vast isolation of the outback carries a weight that no laboratory replication can match. Willie Parsons, that tough old drover, felt his hair stand on end in involuntary fear. Professor Pettigrew, the scientist who explained it all, admitted the experience was literally hair-raising. And Michael documented it on video but couldn't quite capture what his eyes saw. Genevieve and John watched for 15 minutes and found nothing where the light had been. So out there in Channel Country, on certain clear, cold nights, when the temperature inversions create perfect conditions for atmospheric miracles, the lights still dance across the darkness. They still follow lonely travellers down remote tracks. They still hover and bob and split and merge in ways that make witnesses question everything they think they know about the natural world. We may never know with certainty, and perhaps that's fitting. In a world where we can explain so much, where satellites map every square metre of the Earth's surface, where no corner remains truly unknown, maybe we need some mysteries to persist. Maybe we need places where the darkness still holds secrets, where lights dance that we can see but can't quite grasp, can explain but can't quite understand. The Min lights remind us that Australia still has wild spaces, empty spaces, places where the ancient and modern coexist, where scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom both have something to teach us, and where, if you're very lucky, or very unlucky, you might encounter something that defies all of your certainties about how the world works. Strewth, what a story. Thanks very much for listening. And if you enjoyed science not being able to fully solve a mystery, make sure you join us next week when we head to Gyra, and Australia's most famous poltergeist case. But until then, remember that sometimes the most compelling mysteries aren't the ones we solve, but the ones that remind us how much we still don't understand. Big thank you to everyone for all the support the show's received. Make sure you follow us on all of the socials. Just look up Strewth Podcast. You'll see the logo there. And if there's an Australian mystery that you'd like me to cover, please don't hesitate to reach out. strewthpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to get some listener requests, cover the cases that you want to hear. But until then, thank you very much for listening.